Hi, welcome. Thanks for joining us for Uncomfortable Conversations with the K&K Twins. I'm Kathleen.
I'm Kim.
So we're back again.
Oh, with such a good week. This is going to be such a good episode.
This is really a critical episode, so it's really important that we cover this in detail, because if you don't get this part, it's going to be really hard to get the rest of it. So we're going to talk about the lack of objectivity. So last time we talked about what codependency looks like in our lives, how our family of origin contributes to that. But this week, talking about the lack of objectivity, I'll tell you, for me, it's a concept I'm still grabbing. It was really hard to understand for me, because as codependents, we think we see ourselves so clearly, and we think we have such insight. I'm so in tune with my feelings and myself. We're so self-aware.
Yes.
I'm very introspective. I can see my faults so clearly.
And I own them.
We don't.
No, not at all.
Not at all.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to flash this little graph that we talked about before. So just remember here that we're going to, this is kind of backwards. So this dysfunctional family, it leads to lack of objectivity, controlled and controlling, and a warped sense of responsibility. And those behaviors lead to guilt, loneliness, and hurt and anger. Okay? So you're coming from a dysfunctional family, and these are the things that come out of that. Okay? And again, we are just walking through and kind of talking about the concepts in this book, Untangling Relationships by Pat Springle. So we just want to make sure we're giving credit where credit is due. Okay? So if you get the opportunity to order this book, you can get it on Amazon. Just order it and walk through it's a workbook. So you get to walk through.
A group.
Yeah, do it with a group or a counselor or whatever. It'll be well worth your time. So this week we're going to cover that first of those three behaviors, the lack of objectivity. Okay? So let's just first define, what do we mean when we say a lack of objectivity?
This is the big key, because a lack of objectivity means that we don't see situations as they really are. We don't see ourselves as we really are. We don't see circumstances happening around us as they really are. We create a completely different reality.
Yep.
And we think it's true. We
believe it's true.
Yes.
We really believe it's true. But we can't see clearly for a couple of reasons. The two main reasons are denial of reality and the fear of reality. We're afraid of reality.
Terrified.
So we're going to kind of break these two concepts down and walk through it. And we're going to be sharing with you personal examples from our life and things that we have learned or things that we experienced that helped form our inability to see reality, to see objectivity. So,
and let me just say, I know this is a difficult concept to wrap your brain around, so give yourself some grace and be patient with yourself. But also I want to be really kind of hard on you right now. If you are sitting there going, that's not me, I see myself very clearly, I see everything really clearly, this is for you. You are wrong.
We said that to each other many a time.
If you think you're seeing yourself clearly,
you're not.
You're not.
So,
and your life is you are codependent, or you are in some kind of codependent functioning relationship. You lack objectivity. So
there's just no question. You do.
Be open. Just be open.
Yeah.
And learn we're going to talk about it over and over and over again, not because, well, you do need to hear about it, but also we need to hear it over and over and over again. And we actually help each other. We'll say, she'll say to me, you're not even seeing that clearly. And I'm like, oh, I'm not? And I like, you don't know.
You don't know.
So be open, give yourself some grace, because this is just part of the process.
Right. And sometimes, again, let's just refresh really quick about what codependency is and isn't. So when it was first introduced to me as a concept, I was very much in denial and said, I'm not codependent. I'm not in a relationship with an alcoholic or a drug addict. I thought it just pertained to alcoholics and drug addicts and those people that enable them or in relationship with them. So like Al-Anon that deals with codependency. I had no idea the wider scope of what codependency is. So remember, people pleasing, even to the point of your own detriment, right? Inability to set boundaries, Inability to say no, feeling guilty when you say no. The desire to fix, rescue, save other people, that savior complex. The controlling and being controlled. Someone who's controlling you with their dysfunctional behavior and you trying to control them.
And manipulate them to get them to behave in a certain way so that things stay calm and peaceful, or just to get what you want. Those are all part of codependent patterns.
It is, absolutely. So, and it does, we're going to go back and deal more with the family of origin, because that's really where it starts.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about where our lack of objectivity comes from, starting in our family of origin. So we tend to, as codependents, we distort reality and we don't interpret life correctly. We don't see reality correctly. So we're unable to acknowledge the deep hurt and repressed anger that we feel from our childhood wounds. We just can't. It's too painful. We don't see it. It's just like, again, this is a difficult and painful concept to grasp, that a lot of these things stem from childhood wounds that we are completely in denial about. We don't even see it.
And I really feel like it's a coping mechanism. What child can handle emotionally, mentally, not feeling loved, not feeling safe, not feeling appreciated? You can't handle that. Like, you can't even grasp that. So this is kind of how our minds create a new reality so that we can function. So we just deny the truth and create our own reality. And it's sad, but it was necessary as children to be able to function and grow. But now we're adults. And so now it's our responsibility to acknowledge the truth and step out of this pattern of living in denial. But you have to actually know that you're doing it.
Yeah, it was a survival technique
for sure.
as children to survive in our environment. So, so everyone has this deep yearning to be loved and valued. So when our need for love is not met, we lose objectivity, right? Because we have to do all these other things to try and make ourselves feel something that isn't real and isn't there. So the lack of love produces a lack of objectivity. It's just too painful, as a child especially, too painful to accept that we are not loved and valued. And it's even harder to admit that we are angry and hurt about it.
And what child doesn't want to be loved? Every child wants to be loved. Every adult wants to be loved, but especially as a child. So if you don't feel it, and that's not to say that your parents didn't give you love. So let me be really clear again here, that this is not a condemnation on our parents or whoever raised us, but how we respond to things is the truth. And so we have to acknowledge that, and acknowledge the pain of that, and acknowledge the fact that that needs healing. So yes, obviously we were loved, but we may not have received it or felt it. And so we created a different reality in our minds.
And so I'm going to read you a little story about Helen. Okay, it's short, but I am going to read this. This comes right out of the book. So Helen had felt guilty and depressed since her family's last visit with her parents. So she explained, "Our time with my parents was difficult. My mother was very critical of me and even of our children. I felt really guilty since we left there." So this is a counselor that's talking with her. The counselor says, "Tell me about your parents." She said, "Oh, my father is a wonderful man. He's loving and very supportive of me. My mother does a lot for me. She's very protective, but sometimes she's critical." Ken, who's Helen's husband, looked at her and said, "Sometimes?" She said, "Okay, more than sometimes." So the counselor asked, "When is your mother critical?" Helen thought and looked away as she answered, "When I was growing up, she criticized how I looked, the clothes I wore, my friends, my grades. Now she's critical of my husband, my children, just about everything." Okay, so the interesting thing about this is the counselor goes on later in the book and starts asking some more probing questions. Like, she asks her, "How did your father respond when your mother criticizes you?" Right? And Helen's response was that he goes in the other room to read the newspaper. She said that's how he copes when he nags her, or when he nags her, meaning her dad, or when the mom criticized Helen, right? That was his coping mechanism, was just to ignore it. So you'll note that she says that her father's very loving and supportive, but that's not supportive, because he didn't defend her, he didn't protect her, he ran away and left her at the mercy of her critical mom, right? So So Helen spent her time trying to please her mother, doing everything she could to make her mom happy. She felt guilty that she'd failed her mom. She wasn't the child that her mom wanted her to be, all of those kinds of things. But remember that she said that her mother does a lot for her. She's protective, but sometimes she's critical. So she doesn't have a real, a real firm grasp on reality. So the counselor continues to ask her, how do you feel when your mother criticizes you? And it's interesting that her response is guilt. She feels guilty because she doesn't feel like she measures up. She doesn't feel like she's good enough. But Helen says it bothers her because now her mother is treating her children the same way. So she's perpetuating this. And she said her criticism has never bothered me, which of course is denial.
Not true, yeah.
But I don't want her to treat my children that way. I just don't know how to get her to treat us well.
And I think that's sometimes one of the things that opens our eyes to the reality is when we see it happening to somebody else.
Right.
When it's happening to us, it seems normal, right? It's all we've ever known. But when we see it happening to somebody else, specifically our children usually, we go, whoa, 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 whoa.
Something's wrong here.
We don't allow that. We allow that abuse. We allow that abuse for ourselves, but we don't. Again, we see it much more clearly when it's happening to other people.
Right? So the counselor goes on, and I'll just kind of wrap this up, but I just think it's a very interesting example of how in denial we are of our own family of origin. So the counselor asks, do you think your mother has been loving towards you in all this? And Helen said, of course. And the counselor says, do you show love that way, Helen? And she says, no, but I know my mother loves me no matter what I do. The counselor says, how do you know she loves you? And she says, well, I guess I've just assumed she loves me. And so as they continue to talk about it, the counselor says, Helen, have you ever felt angry with your mom for her critical, nature or criticism? And she says, no, I haven't. Why? And the counselor said, why not? Wouldn't anger be a normal response to someone who has condemned you and hurt you over and over? So do you see how in all these different ways that Helen has been in denial? Her father's loving and supportive when clearly he is not. Her mother loves her, or clearly her behavior does not reflect love and care. And she said she's protective towards her. She's super critical about everything she does, the way she looks, everything. So I don't see that as being a supportive or loving parent.
But that's part of what we do as codependents.
As kids.
We make excuses
as children.
for people's bad behavior.
Right?
Instead of acknowledging the truth of it. That's those are just different ways that denial shows up. It's what it looks like in action. And that's all denial.
And she feels guilty because she feels like her mom isn't happy. That when she criticizes her, she's doing something wrong. Helen is somehow wrong that she's not pleasing her mother. So she's taken on the role of her mother's, of pleasing her mom, making her mom, it's her job to make her mom happy.
But, that's part of what happens as children. And I don't know if it's because as children we're naturally self-centered or self-focused. We think everything is about us. But if somebody's treating us badly or if we're not good enough, we talk about this all the time. Our parents are godlike to us. Our parents can do no wrong.
When you're that
so it
young,
must
yes.
be us.
It must
it
be
must
us.
be in our childlike brains. It must be us. So we have to cope with that somehow.
And kids will conclude that if their parents who are godlike to them and can do no wrong are perfect, if the parents treat them badly, that must be how it's supposed to be. That must be how life is supposed to be, that they deserve to be treated that badly. So they go through life allowing people to treat them badly because they feel like this is how it's supposed to be. This is normal. This is what I deserve.
Yeah.
This is how they, that's the kind of self-concept that they develop. So if parents are controlling or manipulative or abusive or condemning, whatever, children conclude that it's their fault. It's not their parents, it's their fault. So they see themselves as unlovable, unworthy of being loved, of being incompetent, of being, whatever, bad people.
I want you to stop and think about that. Have you ever felt unlovable? Have you ever felt unworthy? Have you ever felt incompetent? These things stem all the way back from our childhood. They are so deeply rooted. And so it really does take this hard work of uncovering those things and replacing those lies, because they are lies, with the truth. I also want to point out that means you're not alone.
Right.
This is really what so many of us deal with. And I might be wrong, but I feel like women deal with this more than men do.
I think there are codependent men, but I think you're probably right there.
Yeah, there's certainly codependent men, but I feel like that unlovable, unworthy.
Right. But maybe you're saying, no, that's not me. I don't feel that.
Yeah.
And yet you find yourself in the kinds of relationships that we're going to talk about. You find yourself in a family with like for me, and again, this is not an indictment of our parents. This is just the reality of our family of origin. My mom was hypercritical, super critical. I was very much like Helen. I could do no wrong. My dad...
No, you could do no right.
I mean, I could do no right. Yeah, thank you. I could do nothing. I mean, there's nothing I could do right. It was just ridiculous. But my dad would be in the living room reading in the same way, and it just allowed this kind of behavior. Now, he was emotionally distant, emotionally unavailable. He was not very nurturing. He seemed cool, cold, aloof, distant, whatever. So as a child, that's very disconcerting, because you have one parent that's tearing you apart constantly. You have another parent that doesn't seem to care. And you're just kind of left in that void, floundering to figure out who you are. So these are the cues that you're getting from your parents, who are those closest to you that shape and form your identity. So you conclude then that you're bad, that you're worthless, that you're stupid, that you can't make a right decision, you can't do anything right.
Yeah.
And so it's almost paralyzing at times as a child, and even as an adult.
Yeah, for sure.
It causes someone to be it's hard to make decisions because you're so terrified of making, very indecisive, procrastinating, because you're terrified of making a wrong decision. Because in my house, the slightest infraction would just be a huge smackdown. It would just mean, the world was coming to an end. There was just no allowance for a child who might spill their milk at the table.
And that's
that
a
would just be,
example.
a blow up. Well, it's just a child who spilled their milk at the table. It can be cleaned up. It's not the end of the world. So those kinds of things. So if you think about that, and you may think, no, I know my parents love me. Think about Helen and think about some of those dynamics. Is that really true? Now, you may have come from a family that was healthy and functional, and they loved you and nurtured you and made you feel...
You knew you were loved.
Right, exactly. God love you then, because that's a wonderful way to grow up. So really count your blessings. And next time you see your parents, you hug and kiss them, because they did right by you. And that's a wonderful thing, because you didn't have to go through some of this stuff probably. So
they're probably not even listening to this or watching.
Yeah, they don't care. They're not codependent. They don't care about it.
They can't identify with this. They're all super healthy.
So the main gist of this is that codependents are not able to discern reality from unreality. They're not able to discern what's real and what is not. So if the family acts with deception and denial, then the children learn that. So the practice of denying reality starts in childhood, like we said. So children are going to believe what they see and how their parents treat them.
Can I tell a story?
Yeah, tell a story.
So we, in my family, the wonderful family that it is, really live in a place of denial, my family of origin. And so I actually had a whole conversation with my sister about this the other day, because she called me and said that I really upset her. And I was like, I'm racking my brain going, okay, what could I have possibly said that upset her? And she said, okay, I feel like I have to tell the whole story for it to make sense. So we were talking about my family going to visit my sister's family, and because of COVID, I didn't know if she'd want us to come there because I'm not vaccinated, her kids are. And so I brought it up, we talked about it for a few minutes, and we just haven't talked about it since. So she asked me about it maybe last week, and we hadn't talked about it for maybe about a month, and I said, well, I figured you didn't really want us to come, so I just didn't bring it up anymore. And she got really upset that I thought she would just not respond. And she goes, well, why would you think I would just ignore you? And I'm like, well, that's what we do in our family. If we don't want to have a difficult conversation, we just don't have it, and we just don't talk, and we act like the conversation never happened. she was like, oh, yeah, that is what we do. She's like, she's trying very hard to not live that way and to be really communicative. And so I went back to, well, when we don't want to talk about something, we just don't talk about it. And it was really very eye-opening for both of us, because it never even occurred to me that she would be upset that I would think something that was so normal to us, and she's trying to break the pattern, so it's not normal to her, but it also never occurred to her. She's like, that is what we've done all our lives. That's what mom and dad do. That's what our brother's doing. Right now, in another situation, that's how we function. And that's how normal it is. Like, we make decisions. I made a decision. I thought, oh, well, she doesn't want to talk about it. I guess we're not going. Wasn't upset. Like, it literally was just a passing thought. To her, she just didn't even think about it again, but got upset that I thought she wouldn't just talk about it. But denial is in our minds, it's very, very easy, because it's a way for us, it's a way of avoiding confrontation and difficult conversations, which is why we work hard to have these uncomfortable conversations. And so my sister and I had an uncomfortable conversation where I was like, you were upset about what? Like, and she was like, how could you ever think I would? But you know what? Here's if I've learned nothing else from this study, when you handle things in a healthy way, it affects everyone positively. It has a positive outcome for everyone involved. If you have behaviors that are unhealthy, it affects everyone in a negative way. So because I came from a place of denial, it affected her in a negative way. She got upset. I didn't know the truth about what was going on, so that was negative. We may or may not end up going, because who knows, maybe it's too late now. It could affect everyone in a negative way because I came from a place of denial. And so that is something you'll hear me say over and over and over again, because that is such an awakening for me. That if we just do things in a healthy way, it really is, even though it doesn't happen naturally in the beginning, it really is better for everyone involved. It helps everyone. So that's just one example in my life.
You know, when we respond with healthy responses, everybody wins.
Everybody
wins.
When
we respond in unhealthy responses, everybody loses. It's just not good.
There's no way around it.
That's just the reality of it. So, yeah, we can't see reality because we've lived with people for so long who don't admit what is true about life and their own behaviors. You know, especially if you are living with somebody that has those kind of overt type of, behaviors, where maybe drug addiction, maybe it's physical abuse or sexual abuse, whatever, or it may just be, like I said, a hypercritical mom, a very unloving, unnurturing, unsupportive dad, whatever the case may be. They may not see themselves that way. They are in denial, and so for them, they will deny that all day long. And so you learn that, okay, their behavior must be right and my expectations must be wrong.
Right.
So when you're a kid, you do try to somehow make sense of this in a way that protects your heart. So for instance, for me, I remember as a child, for a while, I went through this thing where I said, oh, my mom and I are really close. Well, I couldn't say that about my dad because he was, like I said, emotionally unavailable. He was withdrawn. And so I tried to protect my heart by creating this scenario where my mom and I were so close, and that I just desperately needed to be loved and to feel like I was loved and to feel like my mom loved me. So I kind of created this false narrative about how close my mom and I were. And that wasn't even really real, unfortunately. But you see the defense mechanisms that we put in place as children to protect our hearts and protect our souls. But in the same way, when you think about your family of origin, if you end up marrying or being in a close relationship,
and you will,
or any strong relationship with an addicted person, a narcissist, or any dysfunctional person, anyone who's a dysfunctional person, that person will slowly erode your sense of objectivity. They will make you believe you are the problem, not them. So they call that gaslighting now. But that's where they twist. It's like when someone treats you badly and you kind of call them out and say, hey, you know what? That was hurtful. That wasn't right. You didn't treat me right there. And they twist it and turn it and get angry and blame you and say, well, this is your fault, or you did, and you start believing it. You start believing their reality rather than what's really real. You can't see it objectively. So what's interesting in talking about denial of reality, because we don't see ourselves that way. I had dated a gentleman for about, I don't know, 7 or 8 months, and things were great in the beginning, and then over time he began to manifest some narcissistic personality, narcissistic tendencies. And when I would try and talk to him about that, he always twisted it and turned it around on me, and I would have to end up apologizing for his wrong behavior. I took it on myself. So it was interesting because I was talking to my friend who used to be a counselor, and she said, Kathleen, do you hear what you're saying? This sounds like a classic narcissist. You're dealing with a narcissist here. And I was like, a narcissist? So I had to start reading up and looking into that. So anyway, the relationship was going badly, and I went and I met with a counselor, and I was talking to her about these conversations we've had and these situations that happened with this person. And she said, Kathleen, that sounds like you're dealing with a narcissist. So 2 professionals telling me that I was dealing with a narcissist. And the first time my friend said it, I was like, what is she talking about? I am an intelligent, successful, woman here, strong woman. I'm not going to put up with a narcissist. That's not me. That can't be. It was exactly the situation. I was involved with a narcissist. And codependents can very often gravitate to narcissists.
I think more often than not.
Quite a bit, yeah. Narcissists gravitate to codependents because they can manipulate and use you.
We're just desperate for love.
We're so desperate, and they prey on that, and they want you and we want them because we think we can fix them. Yes. We want to fix them. We want to help them.
We're so great at seeing other people's problems.
We are, and we just feel, they're so wounded. We need to fix them. Yeah. Don't get sucked into that. But anywho, so that was just me not being able to see clearly the limitations of that relationship and what was really going on, and allowing him for a time to gaslight me until I was able to talk to others and get a better perspective. So it's really important that we are honest with ourselves and others, particularly with others, so that they can help us see reality. So, but part of it, so the harmful consequences of denying reality, we carry that into adulthood. So all these things as a child, we're going to carry that into adulthood unless it's addressed. All right. So, so denying anything is really part of the problem, because if you don't admit there's a problem, you can't fix it. So it's only when we begin to look honestly at the effects that denial produces in our lives can the healing begin. It's painful, but it is necessary, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Well, okay, so if you remember in the last episode, or actually every episode, we talk about how uncomfortable change is. And it is. And part of the reason is because these things, like we said, are so deeply ingrained, and we've been doing them since we're children. But it's really, really important that we embrace that change and embrace the difficulty and have these uncomfortable conversations. Because we need to be able to change our patterns. These patterns, we've been doing this dance with these people for so long, we bring new people in and still doing the same old dance because we're trying to heal these relationships. We're trying to get that love that we didn't feel from our family of origin. We gravitate towards people just like that, trying to get that love. It's crazy actually when you think about it. To gravitate to another unhealthy person to heal the lack of love,
the wound that you had from a childhood. But you tend to marry your dad or your mom. Sometimes it is someone who has if your mom is the one that wounded you the deepest, you may marry a spouse that's very much like her.
Right.
Absolutely. Whether it's male or female, it's just the personality dynamic. Right?
Absolutely.
So we tend to try to recreate those dysfunctional dynamics we experience, one, to see if we can fix it this time around. If we can fix it, then somehow we can heal what happened in the past. You can't, that's impossible. But also, we recreate those dynamics because it's comfortable and it's familiar and it feels safe, even though it's extremely painful and extremely unhealthy.
And it's not safe.
It's not
Any
safe.
Relationship where you are not loved and you are not cared for and you're not living in reality is not a safe relationship. And she talked about gaslighting and even just being, it might even be something as simple as people telling you how to feel. That's not healthy. When people tell you, you really should feel this way. You shouldn't feel that way.
Right.
I have a saying that people kind of get offended when I say it, but I'm like, don't should on me. You're not going to tell me how I should feel. You're not going to tell me how I shouldn't feel. You're not going to should on me. And I try not to should on myself, because the truth is the truth. And so if you feel like people are constantly telling you what you should do or what you should feel, or saying things, twisting the truth, like, he's not drunk. You know he's drunk.
Right?
You know what I'm saying?
If you live an alcoholic parent and your mom is saying, Dad's just sleeping, he's on the couch, and you see all the empty beer cans or the liquor bottles or whatever, you know he's stone drunk and passed out, but mom's telling you, Dad's just asleep, he's sleeping. That's not true. That's denial. And I remember my dad used to always say, if something happened and I cried or upset, he'd say, oh, you're not hurt, you're fine. Or I'll give you something to cry about.
Who else has heard that?
Right? Have you heard that when they say, when they tell you it shouldn't hurt, but it does? Or you're not hurt when you are?
Or when they tell you they're not angry, and you know they're angry. You can
everything
see everything in their body language is telling you exactly how they feel. But especially as children, we are taught not to believe what we're seeing. We're taught to believe not what we're feeling. Because let's be real, we can feel things.
Yes.
And as children, we are taught to ignore that. That is not healthy. We need to be able to know that what we're seeing with our eyes and what we're feeling in our bodies is consistent and real and true. And people telling us how we should feel and how we should act, and how we should think, teaches us not to trust ourselves.
Right. Exactly.
And that's dangerous.
Yeah.
You as a child need to know how to trust yourself, and you as an adult need to know how to trust yourself.
And we need to be very careful to allow our children to set boundaries.
Yes.
So this is just one simple example. I was reading something about this the other day, about people who, when family members come over that the child may not have met or may not have seen in a long time, or maybe they're just uncomfortable around them and they're forced to hug and kiss them when they are uncomfortable doing that. I just personally believe we should never force a child to hug or kiss anybody that they don't want to hug or kiss, because what they're saying is, this is my body and this is my boundary. If you just leave them alone, maybe by the end of the visit, they'll voluntarily do that and warm up to somebody. But to try and force someone, like I wouldn't say to Kim, hey, this is my boyfriend, hug him, kiss him. Like, how uncomfortable would that be? But we do it to our kids. So our children need to be able to set boundaries, even with us sometimes.
Absolutely.
If something hurts them, I mean, within reason, not,
not disrespectful.
Right. But if there's something within reason, allow them to say no, or this is my space, and allow them that dignity. And I don't think we do that very well sometimes.
I don't think so either. And one of my kids has always been, we say she's not a hugger. She's just not a hugger. So even when she was little, she would not hug people. And I, being super codependent, was like, your attitude is a reflection on me, and you will hug them and you will like them, and
right?
That would be me.
We're so embarrassed that you won't hug somebody you don't know.
What? Here she is. Now she's in her mid-teens. She's just not a hugger.
Right?
She's just not. She doesn't like to be touched. She doesn't like people in her space. And you know what? That's who she is. But as a younger mom, because I wasn't super young when she was born, but when she was young, I didn't even know how to and I think that's part of codependency too, is not letting people be themselves. Right. And because that's trying to control. And so she's doing great at teaching me how controlling I am.
They do that when we allow them to. Yeah.
She's doing so, which I feel like means I'm doing better.
Yeah.
Because she has the freedom to say, Mom, stop trying to control me. Yeah. So I think that's growth.
Right? In a positive way. I mean, there are times where, you do need to lay down the law or set, we need to set boundaries with our kids too, and have, things that make sense. But
allow them to have their own boundaries.
Exactly. In a healthy way. So the thing to remember is that a dysfunctional person lives a lie, and they expect you to live it too. Yeah. Right? They're in denial, and they need you to be in denial in order to support their lies. So the codependent lives a lifetime with these lies and learns to call them truth. All right, we learn to call lies truth.
I feel like we need to pause for a moment on that. We live these lies and we learn to call them truth. So that means we have to stop every time we have a thought and analyze whether it's a lie or the truth. Right. So that we can act on the truth, because we've been acting on lies all these years.
Right. Especially if we're engaging with a dysfunctional person that we know is dysfunctional, right? So that's just something to keep in mind. So that was the first thing, the denial of reality. The second one is fear of reality. So we talk about how we're fixers, and we want to, we tend to insert ourselves into other people's dramas and situations. They come to us, we want to help them and rescue them.
We're so good at it.
We're very good at it. But solving other people's crises drains so much of our energy that the prospect of addressing our own pain and anger is just terrifying.
Yes.
It's easier to rescue and fix other people.
We think it's easier.
We think it is, right? In our mind.
That's part of the lie we tell ourselves.
So every now and then I can recall times where I got these fleeting glimpses of reality, but it's so painful that we're afraid of being overwhelmed by it. We remember how terrified we were to even start this study. I felt like the pain was going to be so great. Just having to address the fact that I didn't feel loved as a child or valued was so excruciatingly painful. I didn't know if I could survive it.
Right. I thought it would consume me. I thought I would start crying and I would never ever be able to stop. You know what it really? You know what it really is? I think I thought I would lose control.
Ooh, that's good.
I think that's what it really was. It was that fear of losing control, because, you know, as codependents, we're always in control. We always So I think that's really what the fear was. Like, what if I lose control of myself?
And I can't manage the pain. Right?
And that was paralyzing.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is really paralyzing.
Yeah.
So objectivity, when we start looking at reality, it does bring pain and anger.
Yeah.
You have to go through the anger. There's some stages, we'll talk about this later, that we have to go through. But avoiding it just continues to perpetuate the sickness and the dysfunction in ourselves. And that brings even more pain. And it prevents us from healing and change. Right? We need to change.
Yes.
It's uncomfortable. Don't be afraid of being uncomfortable. We have to be.
That's why we're here. We're here to be uncomfortable with you.
Exactly. And part of that fear of reality is the fear of losing our identity, right? So even if it's critical to understand that fear is the fear of losing one's identity, because however broken and painful our self-concept is, it's all we've got. It's what we know. Okay? If the fear of losing even a tiny little piece of what we have is very threatening. It is terrifying because we already don't really know who we are. We've already floundered around in this abyss with no foundation of love or value or any of those things. So the little bit that we have, we cannot lose.
But here's the truth. The truth is, because we're such people pleasers, and because we deny our feelings and are not in touch with ourselves, we have already lost our identities.
We have. We just don't know that.
I can freely now say that for years I lost myself. I was his wife, I was their mom, I was a business owner, I was their sister, I was their daughter. I could not tell you who Kim was. I did lose my identity. And I morphed into whatever I needed to be at that moment for that other person, but I lacked any idea of how to even care for myself.
Right. We don't do really well with self-care.
No.
We lose ourselves. So if you're someone now that's thinking about this, what do you like? What don't you like? What do you find fun to do? Do you only do what your husband does, or your significant other, your partner, whoever? Do you do those things because that's what they like to do, or do you do it because you really enjoy doing it with them and you enjoy doing it for yourself? Do you have anything that you do just for you?
Yeah.
That you do, whether they liked it, or whether your kids want to do it, or your husband or spouse, significant, whatever, partner wants to do. Do you just do it for you? I didn't have that for years. I just forgot who I was. I did not know who
literally disappeared.
And it was interesting because I remember one time when my daughter was in her early teens. I can't remember exactly how old. And I asked her one time, I said, honey, how did it feel when your dad and I, started fighting? When we started, having disagreements and fighting? Was that stressful for you? How did you feel about it? She said, yeah, it was really stressful for me. But she says, Mom, you know what? It was okay because that was when you found your voice. Now my child is telling me this. This is when I finally found my voice. and realize that I need to speak up for myself. I need to find out who I am and what I want instead of just doing what everybody else wanted. So I thought that was very profound.
And again,
her insight.
it also is it's another example of how we lack objectivity. You couldn't see that for yourself.
Nope.
It took your child to say that to you because we can't even see ourselves clearly. She didn't even know she lost her voice.
Right. Right.
It
When did that happen?
Normal.
Right? When did that happen?
I don't know.
But I've never had a voice because as a child I didn't either. I wasn't allowed to disagree. It was always, anytime you disagreed or questioned, you were being disrespectful. It was labeled as disrespectful. Now, I tended to marry my dad for the most part.
Yeah.
So when my spouse and I started having issues, that was one of the things that our counselor, our pastor, we were counseling with our pastor at the time, and he said, he said to my husband, he said, Bill, I think you have a skewed understanding of what disrespectful is, because it seems to me every time Kathleen just disagrees with you or tries to say, hey, this is hurting me or this is wrong or whatever, it gets labeled as disrespectful.
Wow.
Like she's, and I wasn't allowed to question my parents' authority, my dad's authority, how much right or wrong it was. You couldn't question, you weren't allowed to have doubts or any of that kind of a thing. And so the same thing with my spouse. So anytime I questioned or said, wait, maybe this doesn't feel good. This doesn't feel good to me.
We didn't listen to that.
It was labeled as disrespect. And so especially being a Christian and the church environment and some of the teachings there in the church that, as a godly wife, you need to be submissive to your husband and, not question and allow him to be the spiritual leader and the authority in the home. But sometimes men don't warrant that kind of
facts
of respect because they're not living in a way that
and that's not actually, having an
type.
opinion is not disrespect.
It's not. And so anyway, all of that to say, so I went off on a little tangent there,
but
that is part of when we start to realize how we find ourselves again, where when we get our voice and figure out who we are, what we want, what we like, right? So this fear leaves us clinging to a dysfunctional person who brings pain, abuse, neglect, instead of facing reality, going through the healing process, and on the other end, coming out experiencing love, freedom, and strength.
Yes.
But it's because it's what we know is that dysfunction. We'd rather stay in that and wallow in that yuck, than break through, face the pain, walk through it, and come out on the other side. So the lack of objectivity is powerful and it is destructive. That's the point we're trying to make. That's what we're trying to get across here. So as we kind of wrap this up.
And we're going to talk about it again and again and again. But I think are we wrapping up?
Yeah, I think we're wrapping this up.
So next time what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what a lack of objectivity looks like in our day-to-day life. How that rears its ugly head. So thank you for joining us.
Yes, thanks.
We know it's heavy and we know this is a tough one, but goodness gracious, when you get a hold of it, it is so eye-opening and it's
freeing.
It's
so
freeing. And it's part of the healing process.
Yes.
So
come heal with us.
Good job.
Come heal with us. You'll be glad you did.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks.